Hi there. Welcome to my webinar for Pedagogy Pioneers. I'm really pleased that you've joined, and I'm looking forward to sharing some of my experiences on making learning more visible to pupils and teachers, and on something I'm really passionate about, which is encouraging children to take ownership of their own learning. So hopefully people will find this useful. Hopefully you'll feel that there's practical things that you can kind of take from here as well and maybe try out in class. And I'm also going to add in make sure people have access to a reading list as well at the end, which links to the things that we're talking about for anyone that's interested in finding out more or taking these ideas further. So I'm Kat. I'm a class teacher at Roslin Primary School, which is in Midlothian. And I kind of want to jump just straight in here and begin by telling you a little bit of a story. And this story is something that happened a few weeks ago to me while we were doing home learning. Okay, so pupils were learning from home, and I had a message from one of my learners saying, "Mrs. James, I didn't agree with you this morning in the literacy lesson, so I made a little video which I'm sending you to sort of tell you why." So I said, "Oh, that's really interesting. I look forward to seeing that." So the video arrived, and sure enough, there was the learner, and they had several books with them. And to give you background, I had talked that day about features of non-fiction and fiction text. And what my learner was telling me was that he didn't agree with how I'd matched up the features to either fiction or non-fiction, because he'd found at least 3 books in his house that didn't quite fit that. So they kind of were they were blurring the boundaries between fiction and non-fiction. So he explained all that to me very articulately and said, why he felt that, it was more complicated, and showed me these different books. So I responded saying how absolutely fantastic I thought this was, and I genuinely was delighted to receive the message, because I felt this was evidence of the impact that what I've been trying to achieve with ownership of learning, managing your own learning, being a good learner. I felt like this was what I was now seeing in action, so I was very excited about this. So I share the story with you just to give you a kind of an end point, I suppose, of where we're at the moment. And I think now, if I kind of just step backwards, I can talk through how we got to a point where our learners would do that. Because, being honest, it's definitely not something I think any of our learners would have done, sending out a message like that a few years ago. And I think it is very much to do with the journey that we've been on. So if I can just sort of take you back in time a little bit and, talk through how we got there. So, there we go. So a little bit of context. I've been teaching since 2013 in Midlothian. I have an early years background, so I did early years work for about 6 or 7 years before I even trained as a teacher. And I've been a nursery teacher in our school, but I'm also very keen to work all over the school at all different ages. I really enjoy upper years too. One of my passions is bringing early years pedagogy to further up the school. And I am so lucky that our school has an ethos or a culture which absolutely puts professional learning at the heart of everything that we do. It's it comes through in our vision statement or in our values and aims, at which we really do live every day. And I'm so lucky to be surrounded by colleagues who are extremely skilled, but also really, really keen to improve and learn. And we really do kind of all hold each other up and move each other along and hold each other accountable, and it's a really incredible environment to work in. So just to give you that context, because I feel it's only fair to recognise that any of the work I'm describing today, it's not been done in isolation. It's absolutely been part of a whole school kind of process, if you like. So where did we kind of begin with visible learning, I suppose, in our school? Well, when I arrived as an NQT, I could see immediately that evidence-based practice was a big part of what it's like to teach at Roslin. And metacognition had been a real interest. The school was already working with staff from Murray House around metacognition, doing some research with them. And then this was around about the time that John Hattie's work had come out around visible learning. And this was great because we felt we already were in a place where we'd started to think about similar things, but the release of the John Hattie research really kind of pushed us on, if you like. And at this time, our authority, Midlothian, was also taking a kind of authority-wide interest in that field and really committing to developing visible learning across all its schools. So it was a really great, exciting time to be in Midlothian and to be in Roslin. Growth mindset was also something, Dweck's work that we had kind of looked at and the children were starting to become familiar with. And I was really lucky because I got to work with lots of different professionals. So not just other teachers from my school, other teachers from different schools. I also worked a lot with the educational psychologists on kind of, like even in the classroom, doing sessions around what it meant to be a good learner, and particularly mindset and like your approach to learning. So this was kind of the beginning, if you like. And then by 2015, I went to the Visible Learning World Conference in London, which was just an incredible opportunity. I felt really privileged to get to go to. And one of the people that I heard from that really affected my practice, really inspired me, was Mick Waters. So Mick Waters is an educationalist from England, and he talked about the importance of continuous provision and the importance of children making choices about their learning and leading their learning, and how the adults should be responsive to that, children should lead their own learning. And I started to see, I think I'd felt it already, but I started to really feel strongly about this connection between the early years and visible learning, that they just fitted so well. So you can see I've put Tina Bruce's 12 features of play up here, and I really feel that so many of the features of a play-based approach and a child-led approach, it really fits so well with what we know works from John Hattie's research and others. So I also started to think about sustained shared thinking, and the way that, I think if anyone's worked in the early years, the way that you talk to these young learners and the way that your language and questioning and how you pose things to them is so important. And I think early years have really got a good handle on how to do that. So I started to think, wow, we could kind of bring the same ideas from the early years up the school and combine that with everything that we've learned from visible learning research. So one of the first things we had to start to think about was this idea of what makes a good learner. So this is normally, I think it's fair to say, where people begin when they're sort of on this journey to making learning visible. So we collected baseline evidence as a school, and this is something that we've continued to do every year. It's become kind of ingrained in our practice that we keep this constant sort of revision of what does it mean to be a good learner across our whole school. We really try to keep the focus on learning. We've moved away from focusing on behaviour and activity to learning. And we started to question, I think, as a school, everything that we did in terms of what does this do for learning. And that was something that felt really, really special and exciting. And we started to use surveys and other ways of gathering people's ideas. And this has become kind of just the norm, if you like, in my school. So that's just to give you a little bit of background about being a good learner. So in Midlothian, we're very lucky that we also have a fantastic kind of resource, if you like, in the Midlothian Learner. And this was put together by a working group of teachers and other educators within Midlothian. And the idea is that all Midlothian learners, including teachers, of course, everyone involved in education, adult learners, people involved in youth work, we are all, aspiring to these things as learners. So you can see it up there, and if anyone's interested, then, if you contact me, I can definitely give you more resources around that. There's a lot of work that you can do pulling apart these different aspects. So this is what my school uses as its kind of basis for good learning. It's up in every classroom, children are familiar with it. And we use it kind of almost like a toolkit, I suppose. It's our main resource that we use. So I started to, break down these things with the children. You can see up on the screen, I did a task, for example, here where I asked them to match up the different language of learning terms to what they meant, their definitions. So I started to do a lot of work around what do these words actually mean? And that became a really important thing, explicitly teaching the transferable skills of being a good learner, explicitly teaching about the learning process, explicitly teaching about learning intentions and success criteria, and so on. And one of the things I do is I found it really successful to show videos of people learning in lots of different contexts, and you can use YouTube clips for this. And then after each kind of video, ask the children what were they doing and what were they learning. And I started to build that into my practice, this differentiation between what we're doing and what we're learning. Because in the past, if you asked pupils, what are you learning, they would often say things like, Fantastic Mr. Fox. You're learning Fantastic Mr. Fox? Oh, you're reading that, but what are you learning? So in order to do that, it takes really explicit pulling apart of those two different ideas, and video clips was one of the ways I found useful to do that. I've also developed codes, if you like. I call them kind of learning codes, you call them anything you like, which are made by the children, with the children, for the children, and for me. And then we refer to these, on a daily basis, all the time. So there's a Primary 2 one there, which you can see is a bit different to my current one for Primary 5, which is on the left. This is directly from the children. So we have a big discussion about this, and then we don't just put it up and forget about it. It's revised throughout the year, and we can change it, and we can say, no, certain things are more or less important. And it really becomes, the code that we're speaking about every single day in class. And even things like behaviour, I don't talk about behaviour without talking about these things. So, we concentrate because it's good for our learning, and if we all concentrate together, then everybody can get on and, do their learning. So even if I was talking about that, I don't need to say, I don't need to use the noisometer anymore and say, this is the noise level I'd like. Instead, I'd just talk about it from a point of view of, well, we need to be focused, don't we? And then, it's that way of, you're still getting a nice, quiet, focused classroom, but the way that you phrase it, the terminology you use, I think, it changes. So another big focus has been on effort. And here's some examples of things I've done around effort. So this is my effort monitor here, and I was inspired by one that my colleague had made, and took that and then just edited it slightly. So this I've used with many classes now, several, and I find it so useful for keeping that focus on practice and effort. And when you hear from my pupils a little bit later, I think that, that comes through, that idea about effort and practice. So the way it works is we have it up in the classroom, we have it on our desks as well, and throughout the day I can check in with people and say, what effort level do you think you're working on? And they can say, where they think they're at. And if they do say 3, maybe even, actually I'm on a 4, they do tend to be quite honest, then you can say, what do you need to do you think? How do you think you're going to get it back up into the green? To the 1 or 2, and then they can, they can take responsibility for that themselves. I did add in, I don't know if you can completely see it, but I added in a number 6, a purple at the bottom of the effort level scale, which was I'm putting in maximum effort for the task, but the task doesn't feel challenging enough, because we started to recognise as our understanding of learning developed together that, sometimes you're doing what you have to do, and you're not putting in effort, but actually the task isn't pushing you very much. If that happens, then I want the children to tell me that. So again, that's another nice thing. And children do say, I find that they sometimes will say, do you know what, that was a bit of a 6, Mrs. James. I think it needed to be a bit trickier for me. So that's really, really helpful. The effort level sheet on the other side of the screen here is a kind of a ratings that was more specific to different subject areas. So I used this with a Primary 5 class. And, it was a really good way of talking about them being responsible for their own learning. So they would say, what sort of level of effort do they currently put in? What do they think would be a reasonable target? And how would they get there? And the emphasis was always on how will they get there? What are they going to do? So that was another nice, useful resource I found to, put it really back into the hands of the learners. So a couple of other things that, have been part of this journey, if you like. Using the learning pit idea, which is James Nottingham's. If you don't know of that one, I would really recommend doing a little bit of reading around that. I think it's really useful, and I think what's important about it is not just seeing the pit as something that is kind of almost a inevitable kind of negative that, well, we go into it and it's difficult, but then we come out again. I think there's a lot more to the pit than that. And I think my understanding anyway, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that James Nottingham's suggesting that getting into the pit is not just sort of something that sometimes happens, but is in fact something that we're seeking to do, and that as teachers we want to push children into the pit, metaphorically speaking. And that if we can create that cognitive conflict, that confusion between what I already know and what I'm hearing, that's going into the pit, and that's what we're trying to do. So your questioning, I think, is a really important part of that, because when you ask questions that pose a kind of, oh, this is a conflict in my head now because I thought this, but the teacher's asking this question and it's got me thinking about this, that's when they're in the pit. So that's something that I've used a lot with learners, and they know that that you have to put in effort to learn. So that's the other thing that they get from that, is about the effort, and also about the collaboration and how you can help each other, kind of pull each other out of the pit. As I said, mindset's always something we talk about a lot. I am aware that there's been some revisions, I suppose, or some different ideas about the research around that. And there was one in particular interesting piece which I'll add into the reading list. Basically saying it was sometimes difficult to replicate the research that Dweck did, but I still think that the general idea that it's effort that leads to success, and that, you know, we have different starting points, but we can all improve at things, is definitely still a relevant idea. But of course, it's good to be, you know, critical of it, and to keep on doing that research into these ideas. So to give you a little bit of an idea of impact, here is one of my classes' good learner evidence from August to November. So the first set on the left rolled colours was August, and then November. So just a few months later, what they said then. So what I found was the purple ones and the green ones were the most sort of commonly mentioned by children. So not talking over the teacher, listening to the teacher, doing what you're told, not talking, listening. Working with other people, communicating and teamwork, these came up a lot. Obviously I thought, interesting, not talking seems to be, a bit of a theme, and doing what you're told, I thought was interesting. Lots of children said doing what you're told. And going back to what I'd heard from Mick Waters, he talked about the dangers of having compliant and passive learners, and, teachers wanting children to be compliant at the expense sometimes of focusing on good learning. So I thought that was interesting. So yeah, that was August. In November, I asked the same question to the same group of children, and they said, well, you can see, being interested in learning, making mistakes, never giving up, being resilient, being ready to learn, listening to feedback, collaborates, choosing learning that's the right level for you, talking to the teacher about learning and saying if it's too hard or too easy, knowing the effort is needed to be successful, challenging yourself, keeping on trying, taking responsibility, helping others who are stuck, being hardworking, and so on. So quite a big difference. And I'm just showing that to kind of show you how quickly you can get an impact when you start to really invest in this. So this is another thing that I've used, and it comes from Mindset Works, Brainology, so you can look this one up online. It's a great little resource called the Effective Effort Rubric, and I used this in one of my practitioner inquiries with a P5 class. And what I did was I asked the children, I did an individual learning conversation with all of them at the beginning of the year, and I asked them about, how do they feel about making mistakes, how do they feel about challenges, how do they feel about taking risks, asking questions, and basically they told me what they thought, and I marked it down. And you can see, like, this is one child here, this is their first answers at the beginning of the year, and this is their answers at the end of the year. And then here again, this is the pre-one, so their answers at the start of the year and the answers at the end of the year. So it was a nice visual way of me really seeing that there was movement, there was a difference in terms of the way that they thought about learning. And it's put down in terms of fixed, mixed and growth mindset, but it's definitely, however you see it, the columns are about moving towards being more of an assessment capable learner, I suppose, being more independent in your learning and really understanding the need for effort. So another piece of impact that was, so I'm trying to show you, I suppose, a few different ways that you can assess the impact of this work. So the other area that was really important to me was about how do we not just have good learners, but how do we really get the children involved in running the learning, if you like. And I know that this can be a little bit of a shift sometimes for people, because I think as teachers we're used to being in charge, if you like, being sort of the manager of the situation and organising things. And of course it's an institution, school, that requires orderly conduct, and for safety reasons of course we have to be in charge, and we do have to have rules and so on. But I suppose I have tried to really shift in my head, and I think the rest of my staff team have as well, what is the purpose of some of the things that we put in place in school? So to give you an example, my school moved from having people line up outside when the bell went to come inside. We realised there wasn't a good reason for that to do with learning, and that we were wasting curricular time. So we now just use informal entry for everybody. As soon as it's time, you come straight into the classroom. And that's actually really maximised learning time, and it's been really positive. Another example was one of my colleagues began a practitioner inquiry into flexible seating. And for those who aren't familiar with kind of what that term means in this context, basically what she started to look at was, does it fit with all of the other aspects of being a good learner and being independent to have children sort of sitting at desks, maybe in a specific seat chosen by the teacher, and to stay sort of sat at the same desk for all different types of learning tasks and different subjects. And so her practitioner inquiry was really interesting because we started to see really big benefits from, instead of taking that traditional approach in the classroom, having a whole range of different types of seating where the children can choose where they sit, how they sit, depending on what they are doing and what's right for them in that particular task. Obviously, this is part of a kind of a whole cultural kind of shift around the children being helped to take responsibility for that. Just abandon them to choose whatever they like, no matter how they behave. It's nothing like that. But it became something that across the school was just the norm for us. So it's been quite difficult during COVID times to have to go back to the children sitting sort of facing the front. That's been something that's been a little bit painful for us, but obviously something we've just had to do. But we are looking forward to the times when we can, go back to our flexible seating approach. So again, this fits in with this whole idea that we have, that we're questioning, why do we do this? Is this good for learning? Or is this something that's more just about teachers liking to be in charge and liking children to do what they're told, kind of like what the children mentioned earlier in some of my baseline evidence. So there's other ways as well that we've tried to involve the children. This one with the stop, start, continue, the different emojis and the thumbs up, that's something we've used as well. I've done that with colleagues in our learning environment, so we have that on the wall. Children seem to really, really enjoy this kind of active involvement. And what they do is they can go up and put on the wall what they think we need to add to our learning environment or take away or kind of continue with. So that works really well, just as a very simple thing that you can start doing. And it just starts to tell the children that actually their views on the learning environment are just as important as ours. Another thing I've used to try and get the children involved in managing their own learning is kind of learning journeys as well. It's not something I've investigated, really deeply yet. It's something I still kind of want to continue to learn more about, but I've kind of dipped my toe in there, if you like. So this is an example of a learning journey I did for fractions, decimals and percentages at second level. So it's kind of just showing like what are the sort of I can statements that you would kind of work through, not suggesting it's completely linear at all, but just in a general direction. And then if the children can manage, where are they at on this and keep track of where they're at in their learning journey. The other thing I've done is next steps using this kind of with the children. So I have an infant class at the moment, so this would be quite straightforward, simple things that come up in class. Oh, I think that sounds like, is that one of our next steps? So while we're discussing our learning as a class, then that, we can write them up. But I did something in the past with an upper school class that was a wee bit more formal, and it was every Friday. Every Friday morning I would ask them about the week and what had we learnt that week, and then I would say, okay, so moving into next week for my plans, what do we need to learn next? What are our next steps? And they would kind of come up with, and it was really interesting and impressive what they came up with. They would say, well, I think we need to do a bit more of this, or I think now we need to apply this to something, or whatever it was. I would write them all up on the board so they could see it, and then they knew it was built into my planning. So sure enough, the next week we were doing those things. So really involving the children in the forward planning is something I found really effective as well. The other thing I've got in terms of involving children in the sort of cycle, including assessment and how that feeds into planning and teaching, is, and you can't see it very well, but down here, this is one of my assessment grids I use with the children. So I use pre and post assessments, particularly in numeracy, a lot. And what I tend to do if I have older pupils, I wouldn't always do this with the youngest ones, is I bring them out one at a time to sit with me at the computer. Obviously can't do this at the moment due to COVID, but bring them out one at a time, and then I would go through the assessment that they've done, the paper, we would mark it together, and then write, are we green for this, orange for this, add any notes that they want to add. And then I'd maybe say, what do you think's your main thing you need to work on over the next few weeks in this topic? And they could identify that. And then, so having seen their pre-assessment properly themselves and having a nice visual of it with the colours, we'd go away and spend a few weeks working on that. And then when we did the post-assessment, I would do the same thing, bring them back, and we would look at it together. And the faces of the children, as you can turn things from orange to green, it's a really deliberate kind of visual way of seeing that progress that they've made. And a way of really involving them and explaining how that cycle works. We assess, we plan for learning, we do the learning teaching, we assess again, and it's a cycle, and the children understand that once they've been involved in a process like that. The other thing I've used a lot of is independent learning time. So basically using free play up the school. So in our school, independent learning time is something that we do from primary 1 to primary 7. Play or learning through play is one of our school values, so it's really enshrined in that, which is something I love. And independent learning time is a chance for the children to engage in that kind of continuous provision that I spoke about before, and to choose how they want to further their learning. And I know that sometimes people find that a little anxiety-provoking, perhaps, with older children. I've had people visit before and ask about, but how do you know they're going to be productive? But I would argue, well, they're not any less likely to be productive in P6 or 7 than they would be in primary 1. And most of us think it's reasonable for them to play. So, and I think it's around your culture and how you talk about being productive, and having expectations that we set together around what people are doing at that time, having plenaries about what we're doing at that time. And I do find that children regularly choose to consolidate class learning during that time, which is a really lovely thing to watch them do. Another thing I've got up here is Genius Hour. So Genius Hour I first heard of as something that Stonefield School in New Zealand did. I'm not sure if they were the first, but I certainly want to give credit to where I heard it. And Genius Hour is basically a time every week set aside for the children to do their own learning around something that is 100% just of their choice. So I used this last year, and some of my children I think mention it in the video I'm going to show you. And it's incredible to see how empowered the children feel when you give them a Genius Hour experience. It's very grown up as well. I think primary school children feel very grown up when they're given this, because they know it's like studying for something independently, which they maybe haven't really experienced before. So they choose what they want to learn about. In my case, it was choose a subject to kind of research and come back, but it doesn't have to be that. You could do Genius Hour around learning a skill or something, more practical as well. It doesn't have to be just research, but that's what I began with this group of learners. And you let them choose how they're going to present it at the end. So they had to present their learning at the end, but they had complete choice over how they were going to present it. And that's something, again, that I found really helped in empowering the children and pulling them into, real engagement with learning and the learning process. The other thing I've got up here is, this is from our SQIP, so our Schools Improvement Plan. And this is a child version that I made with the class. So we always do ours, with sort of the learner at the centre, teaching and learning around the edge, and then we usually have our different aspects here. I presume this is similar to other schools. But what I did was I talked to the children about what the different priorities were and put it into language that they would understand. So we've got teachers will keep being good learners, teachers will talk about good learning every day. We will look after everyone's mental health. Adults will support children and their families when they need it. Teachers will keep working on their French teaching. We will all learn our employability skills. So it was that kind of thing. And this is something that we keep in the classroom and we refer to. So it's kind of involving children, not just in the process of learning in their class, but in the learning of the school's learning journey as well. So I'm sure it's not unusual for children to engage with their SQIP, but I just wanted to share that little example of how that looks when I do it. So, what have I learned from all this, and where to next? I would say I've learned how important explicit teaching about learning is. That's one of the massive things that I've taken away. So I can see now that you can't presume anything. So for example, I did a practitioner inquiry around learning intentions and success criteria a few years ago. It was one of the first sort of formal ones I did. And I was stunned to find that the children, even though they co-constructed their criteria, couldn't tell me what success criteria were. So don't take anything for granted is what I learned. And you have to teach explicitly these things. I've learned it's absolutely worthwhile taking the time to do it. Sometimes people ask, well, how do you add all this in with such a packed curriculum? But I think what you get back is so much more than you put in. And this is all part of maximising focus on learning. So if you take away what I call the fluff, some of the things that we maybe don't need to be doing, then you can find the time for these things. I think language is so important. That's another thing. How we speak about things, being a good learner as a teacher, being the role model of a good learner, and the way that I speak and the consciousness, sort of the thought I have to put into how I speak in the classroom has shifted hugely. And of course there's this, is this good for learning question, which across my school we use. So instead of doing anything just because it's the way we do it, or we always have done, or children like it, or parents like it, it's, yeah, but what's good about this for learning? Okay, so that's a nice way of kind of summing up our approach, I think. And the other thing I've learned is just the huge benefits of practitioner inquiry. So my current one, in terms of, where I'm at now, is looking at deepening the engagement and participation and really maximising that for all members of my class. So even though we've been on this journey, and I think you can see from the video I'll show you that, they are pretty good at talking around learning and their process, there's still sometimes children that I feel the engagement and the participation that I'm seeing isn't quite there. So I've been really motivated and inspired by the Talk Less teaching book, which is Wallace and Kirkman, and I'll make sure people have access to that link. But that's an amazing book for talking about not having passengers in your class and how to kind of pull them in. So I'm working a lot at the moment on using the no hands up strategy, and having a culture where that works well, and on using keepy-uppy questioning, they call it in the book, which is kind of using a questioning approach that doesn't make it guess what's in the teacher's head, and really encouraging children to build on each other's ideas, so that the discussion doesn't go one pupil back to the teacher, another pupil back to the teacher, but bounces around the room a lot more. So that's the sort of thing I'm working on at the moment, along with a lot around effort levels as well, and using that as a kind of a tool to keep the children on track with their efforts. So that's kind of what my current practitioner inquiry is about. And if anyone wants to get kind of in touch or network or share anything around that, who's also doing that type of work, that would be really interesting as well. So I'll give you my my contact details as well. So I wanted to put up some quick wins as well. These are just all things that I thought are worth mentioning, that are really straightforward things that people can pick up quite quickly. It will immediately start making a difference to the children and the way that kind of learning looks in your classroom. So I will share my set of quick wins as well with the reading list that I have. So don't worry about writing these down, but these are all just little things that I think make a big difference. So I'll make sure that people have access to these after this. And please do keep in touch with me. My details are here. As I've said, I'll also send out the reading list and the quick wins list as well, so people can see that. And before we have our dialogue together, I just wanted to show you a little video of my learners, my current learners and some of my older learners, talking about some of the things we've done. So if you bear with me, I will just start that.
Maybe if you got something hard, like maybe invention that didn't work at first, wasn't there, you just try again and make it better. They would never moan about I don't want to do it, it's too hard for me. They listen, they don't get distracted.
But it makes them learn.
Big progress.
Making big progress. And how do we make progress in P3?
By practicing.
By practicing.
Growth mindset and positivity. You get help if they need help. Just try it over and over again. Try their best at everything that they do. They put their full effort into it. Well, they don't look at anybody's work and they don't copy, and they learn from their mistakes.
I got a lot better at art because of independent learning time, and I also think I learned a lot about my friends.
Learn vocabulary by reading. So you learn to be kind and helpful and all kind of different things. Whenever I was running to ride my bike with no stabilizers, now I'm really good at it. I didn't like whenever I fell down. I knew I had to keep going. I think I'm usually a 1 or 2.
Okay, so usually up in the green.
Like in the middle of it.
Okay.
I'm really good at math and literacy.
Okay, and how do you know you're really good at maths and literacy?
Because I've been practicing at home. I practiced and I read all of the books that you gave me.
Okay, so practice was the big thing?
Yeah, you keep practicing.
Okay, so practice, yeah? What other things have you had to do?
Try new things.
Okay.
Primary 1, I don't think they would know that much, so I think they would pick up on star number 1. Then they learn, and they get to go on different levels. Whenever you see someone that's like asking you for help, you can you don't just tell them all the answers. But you give them feedback, like advice. I liked that, we had in maths as well, we had loads of different ways of working. What we were focusing on, the thing that we were wanting to learn about, then we were organising something that we had presented, and most of us done a PowerPoint, things like posters.
Well, I think it just sort of when we did something like a math sheet or a literature sheet or anything else, we would always sort of know how well we did, and we would know which questions we got wrong, so we could try and work on the stuff that we got up.
You have to we look over what you've done, so you're not wishing it, and you're okay, this is done now, and you didn't even get a chance to really look over it.
Okay.
We drew a hill or something. There's a boy or a girl. He falls or jumps into something, like a pit, and then it's oh no, I shouldn't have done this, and then he goes out of it.
And how does someone get out of the pit?
I learned. Yeah, but sometimes they ask for help and sometimes they don't.
Okay, sometimes with help and sometimes without help. And how do people feel when they come out of the pit?
Yes. They feel like they're excited and they feel like they're nice and calm now.
I thought it was really nice that we could, everyone could pick, their own special topic, that most of them had their own certain thing that they were doing. So nobody, not many people really did the same thing. So you got to learn a lot when other people got to do their presentations. Different ways to learn literacy and reading. And we just sort of got to experience all the different ways of doing it.
Probably literacy cafe.
Definitely Genius Hour.
You'd want to learn something challenging, and then it's your choice, and you can choose anything you want. That'll give you a big challenge.
You also might get put into the wrong group for you.
Some people find it hard to maybe move up a group because they don't really learn from the people that are better because they don't get to hear them as much. Let them have a bit of time to themselves, don't always tell them what to do because they need like at least one part of their day to do what they want to do, otherwise school won't be as fun as it is.
Okay, so I'm going to leave it there. Looking forward to our dialogue. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and I'm really looking forward to speaking to people and making some new connections, and just hearing other people's experiences as well. People are doing similar work. It'd be great to hear from you. So thank you very much.